everybody. I'm Kara Baskin, parenting reporter with the Boston Globe, and also an author as well, but not nearly as esteemed as these four wonderful authors who are joining me. Christine Coe, Courtney Sullivan, aka Courtney Sullivan, Mary Catherine Starr, and Laura Zigman. And I think that one thing that I often struggle with as both a journalist and as someone who's writing a book is how do you actually turn this into a money-making venture? And is it a money-making venture? And people say, oh, you have a book deal. And like they think that it's this super fancy thing, but the economic reality and the childcare balancing reality and the way that your time plays out isn't that glamorous always at all, at least not for me. I would love to hear how each of you got your book deals and got a book published. And we can start, Christine. We'll just go in order of the couch.
Okay. I'll try to be quick because I know we're short on time. I was a little unconventional with my book deal because I met a new publisher. At that time, it was called Bibliomotion. They've since been acquired. But I had an idea for a book, and I walked up to them and I said, I think I have a great idea for you. They said, okay. I sent them a proposal without knowing how to write a proposal, but I'm totally a member of Make Stuff Up University, and I made it in a way that I made sense. That I would have used a different word, but we're live, right? And they went with it, and it was a very different model. It wasn't a traditional advance model. It was a higher percentage of royalties. So I've made money on it, but writing has not been my livelihood. I'm a consultant, and I'm a comms ninja and all that stuff. So it was a very different model.
Hello. So in my case, I've worked full-time as a fiction writer for the last 15 years. I published my first 3 or 4 novels before my kids were born. So that's my hot tip. Unfortunately, you're all working mothers, so that's
too late for the rest of us.
That's not happening. I do remember being on a panel at a literary festival when I didn't have children, and I happened to be with these 2 other novelists who both had kids. One of them had 5 kids. And someone asked, like, what conditions do you need to write? And I was like, I need 6 hours of pure silence alone in my home, and like this particular tea must be steeping. And these women were like, I write when my kid is at basketball practice and I sit in the McDonald's parking lot and I'm so happy for the 25 minutes. And I was like, oh my God. And they were also like, oh my God, who is this person? And now I get those women completely. And now I am those women. My kids are 6 and 7, by the way.
So hi, I'm Mary Catherine. I'm probably the newest author. My book just came out March 11th. So
congratulations.
Thank you, but also to be seen if I'll ever make any money. But yeah, I got my book deal from Instagram. I make comics about motherhood and marriage and the double standards. And I started making them in 2020, and I had a viral comic a couple years later that kind of launched my now authorship career. But it's very much like the kind of content creator to book publishing route that is now, I think, pretty common. So yeah, my experience is a little different, but I'm very grateful to all of the mothers who follow me and made this possible. And yeah, I'm excited to see what happens.
Hi, so I'm obviously the oldest person on the panel, and because of that, when I got my first book deal in 96, and my first book was published in 1998, I was part of probably the last flush of when you could actually earn a living making, selling books, because you could sell a book to an American publisher. I was lucky enough with my first novel, Animal Husbandry, to sell it internationally, a lot of foreign publishers, and a film sale. And that is just not the case anymore. So now it is just a real struggle to find a publisher, and even when you get a book deal, to have it be something that you can actually live on. And in which case, most of us do not live on our book deals anymore. They're 4 payments over the course of usually 2 years. And when you take the agent cut off of that and you split it down into 4 payments, you have to have a lot of other ways to earn a living. So
So how do you all make it work? In terms of, to your point, Laura, I know that when we talked last week, you were saying that you're the gig queen of Cambridge. So how do you balance authorship?
I am the gig queen of Cambridge, so I do a lot of different
What do you
things. I ghostwrite. I'm collaborating on a book for a private memoir right now, but I did a lot of ghostwriting to earn money. I'm consulting for a bookstore. I'm doing a lot of different things and piecing together an income. I'm the breadwinner of my family and have been for a long time. So it's a huge, but just like every year is kind of like, how is this going to work? So it's pretty stressful, but it's also, you get to have a variety of different things. So if you hate one thing, you can like the other ones.
Diversify. Mary Catherine, so you're also a graphic designer. Yeah. So how do you split your time between your two little kids? Is your job full time?
Yeah, well, I have my own graphic design business, so I'm able to kind of scale up and scale down as needed for all my other stuff. But I wrote this book like in the after bedtime and on the weekends, and I would like sneak away. And at one point I went on like a writer's retreat where I just like went to a family member's second home, very lucky to have access to that, and just like wrote for 4 days straight. And that was when I wrote the bulk of my book. But it took me 2 years to write it. I mean, I'm also drawing, so it's a longer process. But it's really just like sneaking time in when you can, and that's not exactly the most conducive environment for creativity. But as moms, we just make it work.
Courtney, what about you? How do your days shake out?
Oh, well, so last week we did a little Zoom prep call for this panel. And I was a few minutes late because I had just gotten a call from the school nurse that my son threw up on the classroom floor and I need to come get him. That is how most of my days go. I feel like it's going to be one way, and then it's just always another way. And it's mayhem. So I don't really know. I mean, my sole job is to write novels, which I'm very, very lucky that it is. But when people ask me, when do you write or how do you write, I'm like, I have no idea. I almost wonder if there's like an elves and the shoemaker thing happening. I do think most fiction writers, because all of us at least started with a day job or continue to have a day job, we tend to either be morning writers or late night writers. I feel like a lot of women I know are the early morning writers. I am the late night person. And my last book, I mostly just wrote it in the middle of the night because I started it in the very early days of COVID. So I didn't have any childcare. My kids were just 2 and 3, like I just turned those ages. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll just write this book in the middle of the night. And that was my new way. But now I'm finding I'm very tired. A lot of these panels today have applied to me. The perimenopause panel really spoke to me. And so I'm trying to like figure out how to write during more normal school time type hours.
And are you held to do you have a contract, like you need to deliver your next book by such and such a date, or?
Yes.
Okay.
But my first 3 novels, because my background is in journalism, I worked at a women's magazine and then I worked at the New York Times. And so I really believed in a deadline. Like, that's important, right? Deadlines are real. My first 3 novels, they were due on a certain day. I handed them in on that day. I didn't hand them in one day earlier, but I did hand them in on that day. Now, my 4th book, I ended up having to throw away 400 pages and start again.
Why?
Because it was terrible, and it was painful to do that, but I did that, and I ended up handing it in probably like 2 years past the actual date, and so then I entered into this category of like, oh, deadlines are kind of not real. So I was on a panel with 2 fiction writers who just published their first books this summer, and they were like, I have a deadline of 2 weeks from now. I have a deadline of 4 days from now. And I was like, my deadline's December, but I don't know if it's this year or next year. And I'm afraid to look because I won't be done by this December. Cynthia, my friend here, knows that everything I'm saying is exactly how I am. Like, I am just a disaster. but it somehow gets done.
Christine. How do you
Okay,
feel
I
about
want to
it?
say something that women are not supposed to say, and that is that I really love making money, and I deserve to make money. And I think, and I also want to frame that from the lens that I grew up in scarcity, I grew up poor, I was not like somebody of means. So there's also like, even when I'm doing well, there's in the back of my head, I'm like, I might be homeless next week. Like I just, there's this sort of balance between fear and reality. So the reason I'm saying that, the thing that women aren't supposed to say, is because I think an important connection to, earning money as a writer, which is not a ton for me anyway.
Right.
My book came out a while ago. I do have a Substack where I have paid subscribers, and I do some freelance writing. But for me, the way to keep the joy in the writing, knowing that it's not going to be my full-time career, is to have a diversified breadbasket of other things. So I have a podcast where I'm managed by an ad network, and my real work, more of my time is I'm a creative director, and I work with mission-driven organizations on communications, that kind of thing. So I think having those different pieces to give me, to put my kid through college and have a roof over my head and not be homeless and all those things, it's connected to the writing and the ability to still feel joy in something that really matters to me, but I'm pretty sure I can't make a living at it.
No, I'm so glad you said that, because I'm working on a book about midlife right now, and I kind of have the same situation, Courtney, with you, where the deadline is sort of ever free flowing. But I work full time, and I need to work full time. And there's sort of this tension between when can I be creative and do what you need to do and think the way that you need to think in order to write a book, and also like there are certain economic realities of, money is also nice, and you only get paid, Laura, like you said, in certain installments. It's not like you get a windfall right away, if ever. So it's tough. One thing that I'm curious about in terms of, balancing parenthood with writing is, do you delineate, like, do you work at home? Do you go to an office space? How do you actually carve out physically and mentally time to treat it like the discipline that it is? I mean, it's not a hobby. This is a vocation for all of us. Laura, what do you do?
So when my son, I have a 24-year-old son now, and when he was young, I did the thing where I would take a walk with the stroller, and no matter where he fell asleep, I would just pull over to, a bench or a Starbucks or whatever and write. And that was very new to me too, because I normally had to have cigarettes and all sorts of things to help me. And then it became very much like, when do I have the time? And the older he got, it was similar to that, where I would kind of squeeze it in. And when we were all home for COVID, we live in Cambridge, and I used to go to, before COVID, I used to go to the Harvard Law School Student Center, which I used to call Barney's because it was so beautiful and fancy, velvet couches and everything. And I would work there, and then after COVID, I didn't go anywhere. So a lot of time is spent trying to just get time alone to work, and that is the challenge.
Yeah.
And now I just do it at home, no matter what is going on. There's a dog, there's a thing, there's my son, and you just zone out and do it, or you take, breaks where you go away for a few days of intense time to think, because a lot of times people think writing is like in the moment, and a lot of times writing is the thinking, and you really need time to think. And if you can get the time to think, then you can sit down. Once you're in a book or once you're in a project and you've done the thinking, then you can sit down and almost do it anywhere, sort of.
What about the rest of you? Do you ever, especially during COVID, but even beyond, did you have help or someone to take your children, or a spouse or partner who was supportive and helpful in giving you that space? Or
So I have like a great spouse in that respect. My husband is totally, I feel like he hasn't quite taken on the mental load. That's a whole other thing. There should have been a
that
panel
could be
on the mental
that's a
load.
panel. That's
Yes. Stay after for the mental load panel that we're going to just spontaneously do. But as far as just like the actual labor of, cooking and feeding and doing all of that, picking kids up, dropping kids off, getting them dressed. Like my husband is very much an equal partner in that. If not, he does actually quite a bit more of it than I do. I think that's like a huge bonus. You know, there was a piece in the Atlantic a long time ago about, Nabokov's wife, and all these women writers were kind of going on Twitter and saying, I wish I had a wife like that. And I was thinking, I kind of do, but I don't want to jinx it by saying. I think the going away thing is really important. So I probably go away like 2 nights, 2 or 3 times a year just to write. And I live in Milton. I'll go to a hotel in Boston and just write for 2 days. And I get more done in those 2 days than I do in like a month at home, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend that to anyone who's trying to kind of like get a creative project off the ground. I think there's these 2 extremes for me. One is that, and the other is this like when I was writing my book, Friends and Strangers, I started writing it, and my son had just been born. And so I was like, it was partly about new motherhood. And so I knew that all these weird, crazy things that were happening day to day, I wanted to write them down because otherwise I would not remember. But I was, I wasn't in a position to sit down and write a chapter or a scene or even a sentence. So I would just quickly send myself an email every time I wanted to remember something. And they all had the same subject line, which was babysitter, because that was partly what the book was about. Not because I wanted one, although I did. And it was maybe 6 months later that I finally was able to, sit down and actually write. And I felt so helped by having that, being able to go into my email, search the word babysitter, and here's this trail of breadcrumbs I've been leaving myself for 6 months, bit by bit. So I feel like those are the 2 ways I write now. It's either like really piecemeal and kind of forgiving myself for that, or writing for 2 days and not seeing anyone or doing anything else.
One thing, actually, that brings up a point that I wanted to chat about, and you talk about, how your book, you're a new mother, and you're also writing about the same thing. And Mary Catherine, your work certainly is very vulnerable. You talk about your relationship with your spouse and with your kids, and, you put a lot of yourself out there. And Christine, you make yourself vulnerable in certain ways, too. How does that feel, having kids? How do you insulate them from exposure, or how do you know what to share and what not to share?
I can start with that. I have some strong feelings. So I'm probably a little unusual. So I used to be an academic. In my former life, I was a music and brain scientist, and then I left that in 2006 and started Boston Mamas, which used to be this lifestyle blog, and I shut that down a few years ago. But through that process of having that blog and then also writing my book, Minimalist Parenting, I ended up having a lot of conflict with my super awesome, wonderful husband, who's also the most emotionally fluid person I know, as he's a therapist. Just conversations about privacy that I hadn't been thinking of. And so now I err on the side of consent always. In fact, my younger daughter just turned 14 earlier this month, and I had this idea that I wanted to write a piece about 14 things I deeply appreciate about her. And so the first thing I did was ask her, "Are you okay with me writing this?" And she said, "Oh, I would love that. Like, bring on the props. Like, that sounds great." And then I said, "Okay, you approved the concept. Now, like, I'm going to send you the copy by Sunday, and like, can you review it by Monday because I publish on Tuesday?" And she said, "Sure." She gave me consent for that. But it is notable that the one thing I did not do in that post is include a picture of her face, because my husband and I have an agreement that on any of my public-facing channels, I do not post pictures of my kids, like, until they're 18 and could offer consent or not. So I think because I've had some struggles in this department, it's made me more sensitive to kids, and certainly the conversation earlier with Shirley and A.G. Campbell about privacy and security. Like, I'm super hyper aware of that stuff and really trying to not make as many mistakes as possible. I mean, that's the lens, is sort of preventative.
Absolutely. And Mary Catherine, you're sort of the other end of the spectrum with, well, you have 2 little kids. There is beauty in your vulnerability, but at the same time, we talked about this. We were at an event yesterday, and you've had trolls, and you've had people come onto your page and comment. And how do you mentally deal with that? And how do you protect yourself and your family?
Yeah, I'm. It's kind of like a constant evolution. I'm still always figuring that out. I'm lucky that I draw comics, so it's not photographs. So that feels at least one step removed. Yeah. And I've also moved a lot of my more vulnerable, more personal comics from my Instagram page to a Substack behind a paywall. So I do still post a lot of very personal comics about me and my husband and the mental load and how we navigate all of that or fail at navigating that. But I've tried over the years, as my account has grown and as the trolls and the angry men have found me, I've tried to start to kind of pull back on the personal stories and hide those behind a paywall or put them in a book, which you have to actually buy and read to get all the juicy details. But I also don't put pictures of my kids' faces. I had to actually, when I had a really scary, lots of trolls coming after me, I had to clean up myself and my family all over the internet and try to remove as much as I could. So I learned a lesson there for sure. But yeah, I think I'm still always, as my kids are 8 and 5 now, and I'm still kind of always trying to figure out what I feel comfortable sharing and what I don't. And I'm, talking to them, but they're still so young. So it's a kind of constant conversation and something I'm always working on and working through.
Yeah, and I think, we all, as authors, you're told you need a strong platform and you need to put yourself out there. And then at the same time, that can feel very vulnerable. And when critics criticize you, as they will, that can feel very jarring and rattling. How do you center yourself and not let that get you? I remember years ago, I had a troll who would pop up on everything that I wrote. Inevitably, he would say, you could hang a potted plant off of your fortunes. That is what he told me. And I was like, do I really have fortunes? But anyway, that was what he would say on every single, but it gets to you, even as much as it's stupid. But I felt it very hard to be in the moment with my kids when I was kind of wanting to check, who's looking at my stuff or who's writing, who's saying what about me. Not that I was that exciting, but there was this person who was apparently thinking about me. How do you center yourself and tune out all of the excess noise as somewhat public-facing, people, and, focus on what's right in front of you? And Laura, you've been doing this the longest, and maybe before social media got insidious.
It's really funny because I had a really weird career where I started in book publishing in New York at Random House for 10 years, and then I started writing my own books. And I had, success at the very beginning, and I published 4 books, and I was really happy about that, and one was made into a movie. And you think, and everyone else thinks, that your career is going to follow this just natural uphill path, and it did not. And at the publication of my 4th novel, it just completely went downhill. In fact, my agent, I didn't have a troll because there wasn't social media at the time, but my agent at the time said to me that maybe I should stop writing fiction because the 4th book did so badly. And of course, I was young enough at the time. I'm 62 now. If it were now, I would just say I need a new agent. But at the time, I stopped writing fiction. And it also coincided with a lot of other things that happened in my personal life. And so it was really hard to, what was the question?
Well,
as you can see, trolls.
When there are critics and people who, if you're a somewhat public-facing person, and
so there was
your
no
work out
social.
There, how do you focus on your family?
I had a 14-year break between my last novel in 2006 to my next novel, which was published March 3rd, 2020. But in that time, I had never published a book with social media, so it was very, very different. But I think for me, less than the social critics, I don't really have any. Not that I don't have critics, but they're not. Anyway, it's more the internal critic. And I think for me, it was really learning to just be able to ride those waves of how I defined failure and success, and how we all define failure and success. And there's just one little story I'll tell, which is that when the movie version of Animal Husbandry came out a long time ago, it didn't do very well. It opened and closed in like a week, and Bridget Jones's Diary movie came out right at the same time, and we thought we had the better movie. Of course, she's on her 4th movie, but at the time, someone said to me, how'd your movie do? And I think in the first time ever, I was able to say something in the moment that I wanted to say, which was, not great. How did your movie do? Because I really thought that people will take almost any opportunity to sort of shame
Yeah.
failure. And I'm like, you better get used to it, because every career, whether it's writing or any of the careers we're in, really go up and down, and you have to learn that they will go down, and you have to ride it, and then you will re-emerge. Either you'll pivot into something else. I did ghostwriting for a long time. You'll pivot into other things, or you'll come back and you'll have your career again. So I think it's really just that acceptance that it's going to go up and down.
Any other thoughts about focusing on your family when you're
For-
internet noise around you?
For me, I learned a similar lesson because my first two novels did really well out of the gate. And then my third novel, before it came out, it sold in like 18 countries, and Reese Witherspoon bought the film rights, and I was like, wow, I'm amazing. And then the book came out, it just didn't sell. It did not sell. And I was like crushed by that. I was really crushed because I had such high expectations. And I remember my agent telling me at the time, this could actually be the best thing that happens for you. And I kind of think it was, because then it became a thing of like, why do I write fiction? I write fiction because it's what I have always done since I was in like third grade, writing short stories and writing in my journal. I love doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it. And publishing a book is really subjective. You don't know when you start writing a book what moment you're going to publish that book into. My book, Friends and Strangers, it came out June 2020. And I knew it was going to be a Today Show pick, and I was really excited. And because I'm always late for everything, I lived in New York at the time when I found out. I was like, okay, how will I get to the Today Show studio on time? Because I can't get places on time. And I have these two babies. And then by the time the book came out, my book tour had gone fully to Zoom. Nobody was going anywhere. I lived in Milton, my hometown, which I wasn't expecting. And I was in the basement doing the Today Show on Zoom. And my kids were on the other side of the door, and I was trying to hold the door closed so they wouldn't come in. And then like Hoda and Jenna pop up, and I was like, oh my God, I only got mascara on one eye, because I even managed to be late from my own basement. And they were like, that's fine, you're good. And then I did it. And it was like, oh, for me, having kids was very liberating in this regard.
Yeah.
It's really hard having kids. It's hard balancing work and children, but I really like my children, and I kind of don't care anymore what other people think of me. Do you feel that way? I don't know. Even in the world, I'm just like, I have these kids who really like me, so whatever. I don't care what you think of me.
I think it comes with age. I think that comes with age. Yeah. This is all the time. I knew it would go so fast. I could ask you so many more questions, but this is all the time we have. I want to thank each of you, amazing writers, for being here. Thank you all. We're good.